What if you decided to mix genres of literature? What if you decided to mix a heist type thriller with medieval fantasy? Would it work? Would it be successful? Let's find out. I am talking about The Gentleman Bastard Sequence by Scott Lynch. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another episode of Amazing Worlds, where I'm going to be exploring The Gentleman Bastard Sequence by American author Scott Lynch. The Gentleman Bastard series is expected to be about 7 books. So far, 3 have been published. We've got number 1, The Lies of Loch Lamora, number 2, Red Seas and the Red Skies, and number 3, The Republic of Thieves. I believe number 4 has already been written. Scott Lynch has submitted the manuscript, it's been revised, and hopefully it'll be released next year at some point in 2020. I had the fortune of meeting Scott at a book fair, and he actually signed for me books number 1, you can see there, and book number 2, Red Seas and Red Skies. And if you can read there, it says, "Keep your friends close, your blades sharp, and your enemies buried in shallow graves at random locations around the country." So slight pop culture reference there from Scott, an idea as well of what you can find in his books. Now, first of all, I would like to talk about the setting and the world building, which I found quite interesting. So The Lies of Loch Lamora, book 1, takes place in a city, and you can see sort of from the cover there, which is pretty much, it's Venice. It doesn't say as much in the book, obviously. The world, the continent, the cities have got different names, but there's a very strong feel that the main action is happening in Venice. It's a city full of canals and by the sea. And then the countries to the north, in terms of the way the words and the names sound like, you can sort of picture that north is France / Germany type thing. So I found that actually quite clever, because it is building world, but keeping it very clear in your head without having to do much detailing and explaining what that world looks like, what those cultures may be like. And I quite enjoyed that. So the action follows the title character, Loch Lamora, who is a street urchin roped into thieving and begging from early child, and before he gets recruited into the priesthood of Perelandro, who is like the god of thieves, and stuff like that. So basically, Loch Lamora and his gang are scam artists, and they pull these massive heists, stealing from the rich in very elaborate scams. So I really enjoyed that, because it's kind of Ocean's 11 meets Game of Thrones type thing. And if you enjoy heist movies and if you enjoy fantasy, you will definitely enjoy The Lies of Loch Lamora. It was one of the best books I read a couple of years ago. I almost got it by chance. Someone brought me a book for Secret Santa at work that I already had, so I went to the bookstore to change it, liked the cover, picked it up, not regretted it one bit. One of my favorite ongoing series at the moment. I don't want to give the plot away, I don't want to spoil anything, but I really recommend The Lies of Loch Lamora. Perhaps, maybe some people would say it is aimed at a male audience, because the banter between the characters, the dialogue is on point. There's a lot of jibes, a lot of quick quips. I wish I could write like that, between Locke and his best friend Jean Tannen and his gang of merry men. There's some hilarious situations, really good dialogue, but it doesn't detract at all. It's not a funny novel as such. It's got some comic relief moments, but the stakes are high. The plot, it's got twists. There's a little bit of short flashbacks in time to a bit like Ocean's 11, the sort of cinematic techniques there. So all of a sudden there's a jump in the timeline, and I'm not going to give anything away, but so to speak, they're inside the safe, and then how did they get there? So then we get a bit of a recap of the last hour to see how they got to the point where they're at. The payoff is fantastic. The plot is very well thought out. Clearly Scott Lynch knew where he was going to, so he crafted it very cleverly from the beginning, and small sections that seem like a bit of a throwaway at the beginning come back full circle at the end, and you go, oh yeah, that's why they were doing that sort of thing, and it's exceptionally satisfying. Book one, probably top 3 fantasy books I've read in my life. Really, really enjoyable. There is magic, but it is very, very subdued. There's no clever magic system here. It's a very soft magic system, and wizards or magic users are super powered here. Like one wizard can sort of obliterate a whole town. So we get very little magic throughout the series, throughout the 3 books, basically. But you can see very clearly, as soon as one wizard arrives, everyone panics, everyone bows to him. So I'm assuming that in future books the stakes are going to get even higher. The magic system here reminds me a little bit of, well, I think it's pretty much picked out from the Earthsea series by Ursula Le Guin. I even reached out to Scott and asked him, and he said that, well, clearly he's a fan of the Earthsea series. He actually based himself on traditional folklore. Maybe he was playing in his subconscious mind. But the magic system basically is wizards can throw all sorts of spells, but their main source of power over other people is based on the fact that they know their true name. So if you know someone's real name, you can control them and pretty much do whatever you want with them. So that's that, and the first time I encountered that magic system pretty much verbatim was in the Earthsea series. So I wouldn't say plagiarism. I don't know, I just found it a little bit strange that, oh, here's a magic system I've encountered before. But it does not detract at all from the enjoyment of reading The Lies of Loch Lamora. The beautiful thing about the book as well is that it's a story on its own. You can read book 1 and you don't need to read the rest to know what happens. It pretty much serves as a perfect standalone fantasy book. Now, unfortunately, book 2, Red Seas and the Red Skies, and book 3, The Republic of Thieves, are not as good as book 1, The Lies of Loch Lamora. That's not to say they are bad, by no means at all are they bad books, but I think the bar was set so high with The Lies of Loch Lamora that inevitably there was going to be a bit of a step down there. Again, Red Seas and the Red Skies can be read on its own, but it obviously requires you to be familiar with the main characters, with Locke and Jean. And Republic of Thieves for me was the weakest of the 3 books, purely because I didn't buy the premise. And I'm not going to give anything away here, but if I explain it a little bit, in book 3, Jean and Locke are hired by the magic users to go and rig the elections in the city they live. Because wizards, one of the things they do for fun is to organize the elections every so many years in the town they live in, and they hire people to rig the elections and to run the campaigns for the 2 main parties, and they just bet on the outcome, who's going to win. So there are sort of 2 main factions of wizards, and they recruit their own sort of campaign leader to get one or the other party elected, and anything goes except for murder, and Jean and Locke have to get the party that they've been hired for to win the election, and they get up to all sorts of shenanigans. So I found the premise a little bit silly, but the book was certainly enjoyable, good comedy moments. The bit maybe I didn't quite get on board is that you get alternating chapters of different timelines. So every other chapter tells the story of Jan and Locke and what they get up to, trying to rig the election, and then every other chapter deals with a past from 15 years ago that has got nothing to do with the main story. And I think part of that is because some of the more comedic, some of the more enjoyable characters from book one are not present in book two at all, which sort of narrows the scope of what Scott Lynch could do with them. And I think he didn't really get everything he could out of those characters, so they come back as a flashback in book three. Not the best idea. It's almost like it reads like two separate novels, almost, just compressed into one book. Perhaps not the best idea, but not bad. Still, the quality of the writing and the enjoyment of the stories is certainly there. Book two, Red Seas and the Red Skies, sees Locke and Jean taken out of the town where the action happens in the first book, and they just get thrown into the sea to be pirates. Again, they get hired by someone to pretend to be pirates and attack ships in order to create turmoil and make things happen. It's a bit like Dungeons and Dragons type plot, you know, like your main party characters get hired by a superior power to do something that serves a purpose, and they're just pawns in a game. Again, nothing wrong with that at all. It's just that the setting isn't as compelling as the city where the main action takes place in book one, The Lies of Locke Lamora. I believe that the series is meant to be 7 books in total, and it's a really interesting story. Basically, Scott Lynch wanted to write a trilogy based on a spy during a big war. But then when he got to writing, he realized that he needed the backstory of this spy. So how does he get to be a spy for one of the main factions in a war? So he started writing the backstory, and he realized that he needed a lot of backstory. So all of a sudden his trilogy has turned out to be, well, that is going to be a 7-book series. And to me that's good news, because clearly he's not really stretching his characters and the story out to see how far he can take it, or for as long as they are profitable. Is that this is the story that he wanted to tell, but in order to tell this story I need to give you all of these other bits here. So he's not going to run out of ideas or run out of steam, because his original plan was to tell you the last bit, and we need to build up to that. So I'm really excited for that. I think it's going to be a very satisfying series. Unfortunately, well, we're kind of only halfway through it, and it's going to be a lot of time and many years of waiting until the full series is completed. Luckily, Scott seems to be in good health and is way younger than a certain author that we're waiting for to finish the last 2 books of another amazing series. So we will get there. I typically do not review series that aren't completed, but in this case, Gentlemen Bastards is fantastic. One of the best series I've read in the last so many years. Certainly up there with Game of Thrones for me. Song of Ice and Fire. I would really recommend it. And even if you only read book 1, that'll be satisfying and enough of a story in and of itself for you to really enjoy and maybe get started into slightly more mature, less fantasy, no mythical creatures, just plot and character story in a fantasy setting. So really recommend it. Give it a go. Subscribe. Leave me your comments. Tell me what you think. I'm more than happy to exchange ideas. You can also follow me on Twitter at AmazingWorlds3 and let me know. I'm more than happy to disagree and have a conversation about it. Take care and see you next time. Bye.